Hello, everyone. Welcome to English Insights. Today, we will talk about an important moment in world history. It is a story that changed many countries and many lives. This story is about the end of the Soviet Union and the man who led it in its final years. December 25th, 1991, was a historic date. On that day, Mikhail Gorbachev resigned as President of the Soviet Union. His resignation marked the official end of the USSR. After more than 70 years, the Soviet Union no longer existed as a country. The collapse was not only political, it was also ideological. Gorbachev introduced reforms like Perestroika and Glasnost. These policies changed the system in deep ways. In this video, we will explain his role in the collapse of the Soviet Union. Now, let's get started. Part 1. The Final Days of the Soviet Union. The year 1991 was the decisive year for the Soviet Union. Many people remember this year as the moment when a long era finally ended. The collapse did not happen in one single day. It was the result of many problems that had grown for years. By 1991, these problems became too serious to control. The Soviet Union had existed for more than 70 years. The Soviet Union began after the October Revolution in 1917. At that time, it was called the Russian Soviet Federative Socialist Republic. The Bolshevik Party, led by Vladimir Lenin, overthrew the Russian Provisional Government. This government had replaced the rule of Tsar Nicholas II during World War I. After the Russian Civil War ended, the Bolsheviks won control of the country. In 1922, the Soviet Union was officially created. For decades, it was one of the most powerful countries in the world. It had a strong army and great influence over Eastern Europe. However, behind this power, many deep problems were slowly building. One major problem was the economy. The Soviet economic system was very centralized. The government controlled factories, farms, and prices. Over time, this system became inefficient. Stores often had empty shelves. People waited in long lines for basic goods. By the late 1980s and early 1990s, economic life became very difficult for many families. Political problems were also growing. Many people felt that the government did not listen to them. Freedom of speech was limited for a long time. When reforms began, people started to speak more openly. They criticized corruption and poor leadership. This created tension between the government and the public. Social problems added more pressure. Living standards were falling in many areas. Young people felt uncertain about their future. Trust in the system was getting weaker. As a result, many citizens began to question the idea of the Soviet Union itself. Another serious issue was instability inside the republics. The Soviet Union was made up of many different republics, such as Russia, Ukraine, and the Baltic states. In the late 1980s, several republics wanted more independence. Some wanted full separation from Moscow. National movements grew stronger each year. At the same time, the central government in Moscow was losing control. Orders from the capital were often ignored. Local leaders began to act on their own. The Communist Party, which once held strong power, was becoming weaker. This loss of central control made it very hard to keep the country united. Mikhail Gorbachev was the last leader of the Soviet Union. He became General Secretary in 1985. He tried to reform the system instead of destroying it. His goal was to save the country through change. However, the changes also opened the door to more instability. By 1991, all these problems came together. Economic failure, political tension, social unrest, and regional conflict pushed the country toward collapse. The end of the Soviet Union was not sudden. It was a long and painful process that reached its final stage in 1991. Part 2. Gorbachev's Resignation and His View. On December 25, 1991, Mikhail Gorbachev gave a televised resignation speech. People across the Soviet Union and the world watched it live. In the speech, he announced that he was stepping down as President of the Soviet Union. His words were calm, but the moment was very serious and emotional. During the speech, Gorbachev officially handed power to Boris Yeltsin. Yeltsin was the president of the Russian Federation at that time. Gorbachev said that the position of President of the Soviet Union could no longer exist. He explained that the country he once led was already gone in reality. Gorbachev openly admitted that the Soviet Union no longer existed as a single state. Many republics had already declared independence. The central government had lost its authority. Because of this, he said it was impossible to continue in his role. His resignation was not the cause of the collapse. It was a recognition of what had already happened. In his speech, Gorbachev shared his worries about the future. He said he was concerned that people would lose their sense of security. He also feared that the country would lose its status as a great power in the world. For him, this was a painful thought after decades of Soviet influence. At the same time, Gorbachev spoke with pride about his reforms. He talked about the importance of democracy, freedom of speech, and political openness. He believed that people now had more rights than before. He felt that these changes were necessary and long overdue. Gorbachev also mentioned the reforms of Perestroika and Glasnost. He said they helped society become more open and honest. He believed these reforms gave people a voice and reduced fear. Even though the results were difficult, he saw them as a step forward. He admitted that mistakes were made during the reform process. He said the changes happened in a very complex situation. However, he also said he had no regrets. He believed that trying to change the system was better than keeping it unchanged. Gorbachev's resignation confirmed an existing reality. The Soviet Union had already stopped functioning as a unified country. His speech marked the formal end of the state, but the collapse had happened earlier. On that day, the world officially entered a new political era. Part 3. Perestroika and Glasnost. Reforms and Consequences. Perestroika was one of Gorbachev's most important reform policies. In simple terms, perestroika meant restructuring the economy. The main goal was to make the Soviet economy work better. Gorbachev wanted factories to be more efficient and productive. He also wanted managers to make decisions more freely, instead of waiting for orders from Moscow. Under perestroika, some small private businesses were allowed. Farmers were given more control over their work. The government hoped these changes would improve daily life. However, the reforms were slow and unclear. Old rules still existed, and new rules were not fully ready. This caused confusion across the economy. As a result, many problems appeared. Prices began to rise quickly. Inflation made basic goods more expensive. At the same time, wages did not increase fast enough. Stores often lacked food and supplies. Many people felt frustrated and uncertain about the future. Instead of stability, the economy became more chaotic. Glasnost was another key reform. Glasnost means openness. It allowed more freedom of speech and more open discussion. People could talk about social and political problems without fear. Newspapers and television began to report on real issues. This was very different from the past. Through Glasnost, the media exposed many failures of the Soviet system. Journalists wrote about corruption and poor leadership. They also talked about past tragedies, such as political repression and labor camps. For many citizens, this information was shocking. It changed how they viewed their country and its history. The new openness also affected politics. People started to debate ideas more openly. Different opinions appeared inside the Communist Party itself. Some members supported Gorbachev's reforms. Others believed the changes were too fast and dangerous. This created strong divisions within the party. Alexander Yakovlev played an important role in this period. He was a close advisor to Gorbachev and a key reform thinker. Yakovlev strongly believed in glasnost and democratic values. He supported media freedom and political openness. Many people called him the architect of glasnost. However, the reforms had unintended consequences. By allowing free speech, the government lost control over information. By changing the economy, it weakened central planning. People began to question not only policies, but also the ideology of the Soviet system. Communism was built on strong control and clear authority. Perestroika and Glasnost reduced both. National movements grew stronger. Citizens demanded more rights and independence. The Communist Party could no longer control society as before. In the end, the reforms weakened Soviet ideology and state control. Gorbachev wanted to save the system through change. Instead, the changes revealed its deep weaknesses. Perestroika and Glasnost reshaped society, but they also helped lead to the collapse of the Soviet Union. Part 4. Crisis inside the Soviet system. By the late 1980s and early 1990s, the Soviet system was in deep crisis. The economy was in serious decline. Factories were inefficient and outdated. Many could not meet production goals. As a result, basic goods became hard to find. Food, clothing, and household items were often in short supply. People spent many hours waiting in long lines. Some stores had empty shelves for weeks. This daily struggle made life very difficult. Families felt tired and angry. They no longer believed the system could meet their basic needs. Economic decline slowly destroyed public confidence. Another major problem was heavy military spending. For decades, the Soviet Union spent a large part of its budget on the army and weapons. This left less money for social services and consumer goods. At the same time, global oil prices fell sharply in the 1980s. Oil was one of the Soviet Union's main sources of income. The drop in prices reduced government revenue. Political problems made the situation worse. The Soviet Union was ruled by one party, the Communist Party. For many years, it controlled all areas of life. Over time, people lost trust in this system. They felt they had no real voice in decisions that affected them. Corruption was another serious issue. Many officials abused their power. They used their positions for personal gain. Ordinary citizens saw this and felt frustrated. The lack of transparency made people suspicious of the government. They believed leaders cared more about themselves than about the public. As trust declined, nationalism began to rise. Many republics inside the Soviet Union wanted more control over their own affairs. People began to identify more strongly with their local culture and history. They felt distant from Moscow's authority. The Baltic states were among the first to demand independence. Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania organized mass protests. They wanted full freedom from Soviet rule. Their movements were peaceful but very strong. Other republics watched closely and felt encouraged. Soon, similar demands appeared in Ukraine, Georgia, and other regions. These republics questioned why they should remain in the Union. The central government struggled to respond. It lacked both economic strength and political authority. The Soviet Union was a federal state, but real power was highly centralized. When that central power weakened, the system could not hold together. The structure depended on control, not cooperation. Once control was lost, unity became impossible. Economic failure, political weakness, and rising nationalism combined into one crisis. The federal structure of the Soviet Union could not survive these pressures. By 1991, the system was breaking apart from the inside. The collapse was no longer avoidable. Part 5. Key Events of 1991. Coup, Yeltsin, and CIS. The year 1991 included several key events that directly led to the collapse of the Soviet Union. One of the most important events was the August 1991 coup attempt. A group of hardline officials opposed Gorbachev's reforms. They feared the country was falling apart. Their goal was to stop the changes and restore strict control. In August, these officials acted. While Gorbachev was on vacation in Crimea, they placed him under house arrest. They cut his communication with the outside world. They announced a state of emergency and claimed they were saving the Soviet Union. However, many people did not believe them. In Moscow, resistance quickly formed. Boris Yeltsin, the president of the Russian Federation, became the main symbol of opposition. He stood on top of a tank outside the Russian parliament building. From there, he spoke to crowds and called on the people and the army to resist the coup. This image became one of the most famous moments of 1991. The coup failed after only 3 days. Many soldiers refused to follow orders. Some units supported Yeltsin instead. Large public protests also weakened the coup leaders. Without strong military support, the plot collapsed. Gorbachev returned to Moscow, but his authority was badly damaged. After the coup, Boris Yeltsin gained much more power. He banned the Communist Party in Russia. He took control of key institutions and resources. Gorbachev remained president of the Soviet Union, but his role was now limited. Real power was shifting to the leaders of individual republics. Later in 1991, another decisive event took place. Leaders from Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus met secretly in a forest in Belarus. This meeting led to the Belovezha Agreement. In this agreement, they declared that the Soviet Union no longer existed. They made this decision without Gorbachev's involvement. The same agreement created a new organization called the Commonwealth of Independent States, or CIS. The CIS was designed to replace the Soviet Union. It allowed former republics to cooperate as independent countries. Each state would control its own government and economy. The creation of the CIS made the collapse official. Soon after, other republics joined the new group. On December 25, 1991, Gorbachev resigned. The Soviet flag was lowered from the Kremlin. These events marked the final end of the Soviet Union and the beginning of a new political era. Part 6. Global Impact and Gorbachev's Legacy. The collapse of the Soviet Union had a huge global impact. One of the most important results was the official end of the Cold War. For decades, the world was divided between two powerful sides. After 1991, this long period of tension came to an end. Many people hoped for a more peaceful world. The collapse also led to the creation of 15 new countries. These countries were former Soviet republics. They included Russia, Ukraine, Belarus, and the Baltic states. Each new country had to build its own government, economy, and national identity. This was a difficult and slow process. Europe changed greatly after the Soviet Union ended. Eastern European countries moved closer to Western Europe. Many of them later joined the European Union and NATO. NATO also expanded eastward. This expansion increased security for some countries, but it also created new tensions with Russia. Former Soviet states faced many serious challenges. Their economies were weak and unstable. Inflation and unemployment were common. Many people lost savings and jobs. Political systems were still developing. Some countries struggled with corruption and weak institutions. The collapse also caused social problems. Living standards fell in many areas. Public services were reduced. Millions of people felt uncertain about the future. These difficulties shaped how people remembered the end of the Soviet Union. Mikhail Gorbachev's legacy is viewed very differently around the world. In the West, many people see him as a hero. They credit him for ending the Cold War peacefully. They praise his support for dialogue, freedom, and cooperation. In Russia, opinions are more divided. Some people respect him for trying to reform the system. Others blame him for the loss of power and stability. They believe his reforms caused chaos and decline. Because of this, Gorbachev remains a controversial figure. In 1990, Gorbachev received the Nobel Peace Prize. The award recognized his role in reducing global tension. It also honored his efforts to change international relations without violence. The story of the Soviet collapse offers important lessons. Reform can bring hope, but it also brings risk. Power can disappear faster than expected. History is shaped by both choices and consequences. Gorbachev's legacy reminds us that change is complex and never simple.